for each other. James 5:16, love one another deeply from the heart. 1 Peter 3:8, live in harmony with one another. 1 Peter 3:8, love each other deeply. 1 Peter 4:8, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. 1 Peter 4:9, each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others or one another. 1 Peter 4:10, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. 1 Peter 5:5, greet another with a kiss of love. There's that fourth one. 1 Peter 5:14, and then I guess he wanted to drill it home. Love one another, 1 John 3:11. Love one another, 1 John 3:23. Love one another, 1 John 4:7. Love one another, 1 John 4:11. Love one another, 1 John 4:12. Love one another, 2 John 5. You know, he started off with a whole bunch of love one another's at the beginning of that list. And then he ended again with love one another's in that list. I think he means something here. Now, a lot of times we're really good in saying, well, we're supposed to just love one another here. But it doesn't really say that in there anywhere. And in fact, if we wanted some clarity on that, if we go back to that Luke where he talks about, loving God first and then loving your neighbor as yourself, the guy goes, well, who's my neighbor? Remember? And so we hear the story of the Good Samaritan. And I know you've heard it many times before, but I'm going to read it again. Jesus replied and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by chance, a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put on him his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And on the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I return, I will repay you. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, the one who showed mercy toward him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do the same. And so the Samaritan, who was supposed to be their mortal enemy, is the one who showed love to one of their own kind. But also, so did the innkeeper, by the way. I always thought about that. Interesting. He said, who are these 3? But, and yet, sometimes we have a hard time doing that. And reaching out to those that are different, who are not of our faith or whatever. And Jesus said, you know what? By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. All men will know. I mean, that's what's going to change this world. When we let Jesus come and flow into us to overflowing, and we learn to love as he loved. And these one another verses, you could kind of break them up, and there's a third of the one another's that kind of deal with unity. And us being unified in harmony with God. How much unity and harmony do we see in our world today? How much unity and harmony do we see in just our own families sometimes? I have to admit, I lost my temper really bad yesterday with Pam. And I don't think I've blown it like that a while. I mean, I blow it, but I hadn't gotten that hot in a long time. And I believe that, I grew up in a family who, whoever yelled the loudest, the longest won the argument. It wasn't whether they were right or wrong, and so it was some crazy stuff in my family. And I'm talking most of my mom's side of the family going way back. There have been some crazy fights through the years. My mom came home from school one day, and my grandpa and grandpa had my uncle one arm each, and they were literally about ready to rip this kid apart, fighting and screaming over him, and weren't even focused on him. They were just focused on winning the argument. And part of it was they were going through a divorce, sadly, and they were, arguing over who got him in the divorce. And so, thankfully, my oldest uncle on her side came home about that time and ran over and stopped them and said, "Are you insane?" Yes. Yes, they were. Our world is insane. And we don't know how to live in love and harmony like we should. We only know how to win the argument, and we don't know how to say we're sorry. And, well, it's their turn to say I'm sorry. I'm not saying I'm sorry, You guys never do that, right? You're always immediately right there. No. And again, about a third of these verses again are on, again, loving one another. What does that look like? And then about 15% are about humility. Because honestly, I don't know if you can truly love without being humble, without being selfish. You can't be selfish and really love right, I don't think. And then there's all those, the ones that really don't fit into a category, but they're all, again, about caring for those that are around us and that need our love. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis wrote, "Do not waste your time bothering whether you love," that's that feeling thing again, "your neighbor. Act as if you did. Act as if you did." You're going, wow, what does that look like? There was a newspaper columnist, and he was also a minister, and his name was George Crane. And he tells of a wife who came into his office, and she was just really angry at her husband, and it didn't seem like anything he could say could calm her rage. And of course, she used those words we hear all the time. She fell out of love with him. Well, again, love is a choice, folks. All of us have to make times to choose to love even when the other person isn't very lovely. But again, we're looking at the other person and we forget that they're choosing to love us when we're not very lovely. And so finally, as he's listening to her, she's just going to get a divorce. And he said, "Well, wait a minute. Before you do it, I've got a great idea." And he says, "What I want you to do is go home and fool him. Fool him. And pretend that you love him for a little while. Do everything that you can think of to make him feel like you love him. Just everything. Cooking, cleaning, romantic, everything you can think of." And so she did. He goes, "And then drop the bomb. Ha, 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 fooled you." And say, "I'm going to divorce you." And she goes, "That's a great idea." So she goes home and she loves on this guy for 2 months, doing everything that she can think of in love towards this guy. And so finally, after a couple of months, the minister, his name is George Crane again, calls and says, "Hey, so you ready to drop the bomb?" And she goes, "No, are you crazy? Turns out I really do love him." Love is an action. And when we act in love, we start feeling love. And so instead of reacting to the negativity, we need to act out in love. I'm preaching to myself here, guys. We have to learn to act in love towards other people. It talked about in here about that encouragement thing. And that's part of love, is lifting others up. And so the story is told of a little boy, and he comes home to his father and said, "Dad, can we play darts?" Because I want to play darts. I'll throw them and you just say wonderful. You know, it didn't matter whether he missed, hit, or whatever. He just wanted to hear that he was doing something right. William Arthur Ward said, "Flatter me, and I may not believe you." You know, sorry, honey, don't mean to pick on you again. I'll tell her, "Oh, you look beautiful," whatever. She goes, "You have to say that. You're married to me." You know, it gets me nothing. But somebody else comes, "Wow, you really look nice," and she just beams like crazy. You know, we all need that. We need that love, that encouragement. It lifts us up. You know, again, flatter me and I may believe you. Criticize me and I may not like you. And, you know, ignore me and I may not forgive you. Encourage me and I will not forget you. You know, I think back in my life. Now, of course, Gary Chapman has written a book called The 5 Love Languages. Anybody in here read it? And there's also the 5 love languages of God, 5 love languages of children. I mean, you know, how do we relate to them? And there's words of affirmation, acts of service, gifts, quality time, physical touch. You know, are the 5. And we all have one that we kind of gravitate towards. You know, that's our primary, and then we might have a secondary language. And sometimes we can learn, because we've been around other people so much that have another love language, we can learn to love that in that language, but it might not be our language. You know, like when we learn a second language. You know, my son right now, he's struggling to learn Spanish because he's in Cuba. And so he's still at the point where he's having to use an interpreter. And so it's not natural for him to speak that language, but he is learning to. But it doesn't, you know, he doesn't think in Spanish. He speaks in English and then has to translate. And that's how we are when we're using secondary love languages too. And the way we feel loved is when we feel loved in the language we are. So now mine is physical touch, primary. Secondary is words of affirmation. So that's why I want to give Pam words of affirmation, but it's not her love language, so that's why it doesn't mean so much to her, at least for me. And so hers is quality time and acts of service. And so if I choose to love her, I have to love in her love language. And Gary talks about in this book how he was telling this guy that, you know, he's doing a seminar, and this guy goes, "So you're telling me that if I want to love my wife, I have to wash the dishes and take out the trash?" And Gary goes, "Yep." And he goes, I can't do that. That's just not who I am." He goes, "Well, then you're saying you don't love her." "That's not true. I told her I loved her once. And if it ever changes, I'll tell her again." But, you know, and Gary's like, "No, you have to learn to love her in the way she needs to be loved." And we have a whole world of people that need to be loved. You know, we keep hearing about these kids. And it's bad enough at 13. It's like, what do they have at 13? They're bad enough they want to commit suicide. They should be having fun in life. They're at the easy part. And now we got 9. And it's sadly enough, guys, it's becoming an epidemic. And in our area especially, they're saying that the depression and the suicide rate is it's higher, if I understand correctly, higher than the nation, right? And it's because, I'm sorry, the world has forgotten how to love, and we have to figure out how to love people and to teach other people how to love people. And we have to model how to love people. And I have to spend a lot of time on my knees to get God to teach me how to love people. I thought I had it figured out, but I've forgotten somewhere along the way. You know, and sometimes, yes, we get it backwards too. We can love other people, and then we don't love those that are closest to us in the way they need to be loved. We figure, well, they have to love me, and so, you know, you're afraid to let anybody else know what's really going on in your heart and mind, and then you take it out on those closest to you. But that's not right either. We have to learn how to love and encourage one another. You know, there was a gentleman, he was in China, and as he was walking through, he sees all these kids playing different things, and almost every one of them had a kid strapped to their back. And he goes, man, that's really sad that you have to do that, you know, and I'm sure it's horrible. And the kid goes, no, I don't mind. He's my brother. And the guy goes, how, you know, what? He was just blown away because of the attitude of this kid. It's no burden. He's my brother. And that's the way we need to be. It's no burden to love because God loved us. He first loved us. And so we should be able to love others just as he loved. Maria Dyer, she was born in 1837 on the mission field in China, where her parents were pioneer missionaries. Both her parents died when Maria was a little girl, and she was sent back to England to be raised by an uncle. The loss of her parents, however, did not deter her young heart from the importance of sharing the gospel. At age 16, she, along with her sister, returned to China to work in a girls' school as a missionary herself. 5 years later, she married Hudson Taylor. You may have heard that name. He's well known today for his life of ministry, faith, and sacrifice. Hudson and Maria's work was often criticized, even by other Christians. At one point, Maria wrote, as to the harsh judging of the world or the more painful misunderstandings of Christian brethren, I generally feel that the best plan is to go on with our work and leave God to vindicate our cause. Of their 9 children, only 4 survived to adulthood. Maria herself died of cholera when she was just 43. But she believed the cause was worthy of the sacrifice. On her grave marker, these words were inscribed, "For her to live was Christ, and to die was gain." In a day when many are self-absorbed and care more about what they can get rather than what they can give, we need a renewal of sacrificial love. It was God's love for us that sent Jesus into the world to die for our sins. And it is that kind of giving love that our world needs so greatly today. When we love God as we should, our interests fade and we magnify him. We need to have that kind of sacrificial love. But I think we're working the crossword puzzle all wrong. A man was working a crossword puzzle and he asked, what is a 4-letter word for strong emotional reaction toward a difficult person? 4-letter word. Can you think of one? Oh, you went to the punchline. Someone standing by said, hate. I mean, that's a 4-letter word with strong emotional reaction to a difficult person. That's usually what we do. And a lady interrupted and said, no, the answer is love. A strong emotional reaction toward a difficult person. Jesus said what? To love our enemies even. There should be no distinction. Our love should flow to everyone. They all need it. There was a young girl, her name was Hannah, and she was on the junior varsity cheerleading team, but she wanted to be on the varsity team. And so she just kept practicing and practicing. The reality is, though, the school had 2,000 students. It's a big school. And there were only 3 places still available on the varsity team. And 200 girls were trying out for 3 places. But her friend, was on the team. And she really wanted to be on the team with her friend Melissa. Well, her friend Melissa wanted her to be on there too, so she practiced with Hannah. They spent hours practicing for this event. And so, and of course, Hannah, goes to her dad. Dad, do you think God wants me to be on the varsity team? He goes, honey, I can't answer that. He said, all you can do is do your best and leave the results up to God. Sound like good counsel? Maybe. Do our best. Leave the results up to God. Our part is to love. What people do with that love is between them and God. Christ, his part was to love. And what people did with that is between them and him. It's their decision. It's their choice. But we still have that mandate to love. Anyway, they continued to practice, and they went. She performed her routine in front of the judges. They were supposed to post the results by 9:45. A little before 10, she got there to check the results. And amazingly, she finally comes home, and she's in tears. And her mom and dad are, oh, honey, we're so sorry. And, you worked hard. You did your best. And that's all that matters. And we're sorry that you didn't make it. And she goes, no, you don't understand. I did make it. And so they're confused. Well, why are you crying? Because they took Melissa's spot away and gave me her spot. And she's so devastated. And, she's like, what do I do now? And anyway, I don't know how to make her feel better. And she goes, do you think I could go to the judges and say, you know what? Forget it. I don't want the spot. Please give it back to Melissa. And they said, well, honey, that's probably not going to happen. I mean, yes, I guess you could try. Anyway, Hannah got up that evening, and she went to her friend's house because she knew how devastated her friend was, and she slept on the floor by her friend's bed to try and encourage her that it was okay. I mean, too often in this life we rush off to, our victories, and we forget about who's left in the wake. But, she was more concerned about her friend than what she had gotten. And we need to learn to love our neighbor as ourselves. We need to learn what it means to love one another, to, serve one another, to encourage, to let go, and truly let the love of God sink into us. And it will change